"Marry me just for this one night," the widow said, and the cowboy gave her that chance. After losing her husband, she had learned to keep her heart guarded, to manage the little farm her family had left her, and to carry the weight of loneliness without complaint. Every morning, she would wake to the soft light filtering through the curtains, her small kitchen smelling of coffee and fresh bread, and the silence of a house that had once been full of laughter. She had friends and neighbors, yes, but something inside her always felt incomplete, like a part of her life had ended with her husband and had never returned. Life had taught her patience, but it had also taught her that patience was not always enough. She was a widow with no children, no one to speak for her, and no one to support her in difficult times. The townspeople respected her quiet strength, but respect could not pay the bills, protect her from the cold nights, or prevent her from feeling the gnawing fear that came from living alone in a world that sometimes seemed too harsh for one person to handle. On one particularly dry and hot afternoon, Clara sat on her porch, fanning herself with a small hand fan. She watched the fields sway gently under the sun, the crops that her husband had planted still standing, stubbornly resisting the heat. Her mind wandered back to the early days after his death, when grief had been raw and constant. She remembered the first night she had cried herself to sleep, feeling utterly alone, and she remembered the long months she had spent learning how to run the farm herself, how to bargain at the market, and how to protect herself in ways she had never imagined. Over time, she had grown stronger, but she had also grown wary. The day had been long and hard, and Clara knew that the night would bring no relief. In the quiet of the house, shadows moved along the walls like silent witnesses, reminding her that the world could be unforgiving. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. She squinted into the sun, seeing the figure of a man riding slowly along the dirt road. He was a cowboy, known to everyone in the town. His name was James, though most people simply called him the cowboy. He was a man of few words, always calm, always steady, and somehow people felt safe around him. Clara had known James for many years, though their interactions had been limited. He was always around the town, helping where help was needed, fixing fences, delivering supplies, and sometimes just standing quietly when things became difficult. There was something about his presence that reminded people of safety, of stability, of someone who understood the hard life of the plains without needing to explain it. Today, Clara felt that she needed him more than ever. Her hands trembled slightly as she went inside and prepared herself. It was not easy to ask for help, and it was even harder to ask for something so unusual, something so personal. She knew that people in the town would gossip if they ever found out what she was planning, but she had little choice. A serious situation had arisen, one that threatened her home and her dignity. She needed someone to stand by her, if only for a short time, someone whose presence would quiet the judgmental eyes of the townspeople. And so, with her heart pounding and her mind racing, she decided to do what she had never thought she would do. She would ask the cowboy to marry her, just for one night. She found him sitting by the edge of the field, polishing his boots and tending to his horse. He looked up when he saw her approach, his eyes calm and steady, and Clara felt a strange mix of fear and relief. She took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage she had left, and spoke before she could change her mind. "James," she began, her voice soft but firm, "I need your help." He looked at her carefully, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it, Clara?" he asked, his voice low but steady, carrying the same calmness that had always comforted the people of the town. She hesitated, knowing that what she was about to say might shock him. I need you to marry me," she said, the words trembling slightly as they left her lips. "Just for one night. It's important. It's the only way I can protect myself and my home." The cowboy was silent for a moment, staring at her with an unreadable expression. His mind raced as he tried to understand what she was asking, and yet he could see the truth in her eyes. This was not a request made lightly. It was not a whim or a game. This was a woman who had thought deeply, who had weighed her options, and who had chosen him because she trusted him, because she believed he could help her in a way that no one else could. He had never been married, had never had anyone truly depend on him in that way, and yet he felt something stir inside him, something protective, something human, something that recognized the weight of her need. He wanted to ask her why, to argue with her, to refuse, but he also knew that sometimes people needed help without question. "Clara," he said finally, his voice calm but firm, "this is unusual. You understand that marriage is not something to take lightly." "I do," she replied, her eyes steady now, holding his gaze. "I am not asking for forever, just for one night, that is all. I need someone to stand with me, to protect my home and my name. After that, it will end. I promise." The cowboy studied her, noticing the determination in her face, the strength in her posture, and the desperation that lingered just beneath the surface. He could see that she had spent nights thinking this through, that she had not come to him lightly, and that she truly needed his help. He nodded slowly. "If it is truly what you need, then I will do it," he said, "just for one night." A sense of relief washed over her, though it was mixed with nervousness. She knew that what she was asking was not ordinary, but she also knew that she had chosen the right person. The cowboy's agreement brought her hope, a fragile but powerful hope that perhaps things could be set right, at least for now. Over the next few days, Clara prepared for the night carefully. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, cooked meals that reminded her of her late husband's favorite dishes, and thought carefully about what she would say and how she would behave. She knew that this was not about romance or love. It was about trust, respect, and survival. And yet, deep down, she could not deny a flicker of curiosity, a tiny spark of wonder about what it might feel like to be truly seen by someone after so many years of solitude. The cowboy, in his own quiet way, prepared as well. He thought about the responsibilities he was taking on, about the trust this woman was placing in him, and about the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. He did not feel burdened, he felt called. There was a sense of purpose in helping someone in need, in standing by them when the world might otherwise turn its back. When the evening arrived, the town was quiet, the sun dipping low into the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold and orange. Clara waited nervously, the house filled with the scent of fresh bread and herbs, candles flickering gently on the table. She heard the sound of hooves and then the calm voice of the cowboy greeting her as he stepped inside. There was no fanfare, no ceremony, only quiet understanding. They moved through the night with respect, speaking little but understanding much. Each moment was deliberate, each glance meaningful. They shared stories of their lives, of loss and hope, of fear and courage. In that shared silence, a bond began to form, one born not out of passion but out of human kindness and understanding. By the end of the night, as the first light of dawn touched the windows, Clara realized that she had found something she had not expected, a sense of relief, a sense of safety, and a small, precious sense of companionship. The cowboy, too, had found a shift within himself, a recognition that sometimes the right thing was not about rules or traditions, but about helping someone when they needed it most. Though the night was meant to be only one night, the connection they had formed would leave an imprint on both their lives, one that neither of them could ignore. And so, as the sun rose over the quiet town, the widow and the cowboy prepared to face the consequences of their unusual arrangement, unaware that the events of this night would change the course of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. After agreeing to Clara's unusual request, the cowboy, James, returned to his small cabin on the outskirts of town, his mind restless. Normally, he preferred solitude. Life on the plains had taught him the value of quiet, of routine, of keeping his thoughts and emotions to himself. But tonight was different. Clara's words echoed in his mind like a persistent wind, unrelenting and insistent. Just for one night. Those words carried a weight he had never encountered before. James sat on the edge of his bed, hands clasped together, staring at the wooden floor. He tried to picture what the night would be like, but all he could see was Clara's face, determined, composed, yet vulnerable. It was the vulnerability that unsettled him the most. He had lived through hard times, seen hardship and sorrow, but he had never been asked to step so close into someone's life, so fully, and yet temporarily. There was a strange honor in it, but also a strange responsibility. He thought about his own life, about the years he had spent riding from town to town, helping where he could, yet always keeping people at a distance. He had never married, had never built a family, and had always told himself that solitude was easier, safer, simpler. But something about Clara's plea had pierced that armor. He realized that this was not about duty, not about obligation, but about humanity, about answering a call when someone needed help. And it was clear to him that Clara needed help, more than she could ever admit aloud. Meanwhile, Clara prepared herself for the night with meticulous care. She cleaned the house, set the table with the small set of china she had inherited from her husband, and arranged fresh flowers on the windowsill. She wanted the evening to feel dignified, to carry a sense of respect, because she knew that what she was asking of James was extraordinary. She did not want him to feel burdened or uncomfortable. She wanted him to see that her request came from necessity, not whim, and that she trusted him completely. Yet beneath her calm exterior, Clara was nervous. She had lived so many years alone that the idea of allowing someone so close, someone she barely knew in such an intimate way, was terrifying. She worried that she might say the wrong thing, behave awkwardly, or reveal her fear. She feared judgment both from herself and from others, and yet there was a spark of hope she could not ignore. Maybe, just maybe, this one night could bring relief, not only to her situation but to her heart, which had been quietly longing for connection for years. As evening approached, the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the plains in golden hues. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and distant fields, and the town seemed unusually quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. James rode slowly toward Clara's house, his horse's hooves soft against the dirt road. He felt the weight of the task ahead, but he also felt calm in a way that surprised him. He did not doubt Clara's sincerity, nor did he doubt his own ability to handle the night with respect and dignity. When he arrived, Clara was waiting at the porch, her posture straight, her eyes calm but alert. There was a quiet strength in her presence that James could not ignore. She greeted him with a small nod, her hands folded neatly in front of her. He dismounted, adjusting the brim of his hat, and walked toward her with careful steps. There was no need for words. They both understood the gravity of the moment. They entered the house together, moving slowly and deliberately. Clara led James to the parlor, where a small fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting warm light across the room. She offered him a chair and a cup of tea, and he accepted with a silent nod. The silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. They did not need to rush, nor did they need to speak unnecessarily. The weight of their shared purpose was enough to fill the space between them. As the evening wore on, they spoke quietly about their lives. Clara told James about her late husband, about the early days of their marriage, about the challenges they had faced together, and the sorrow that followed his passing. She did not speak to complain or to seek pity. She spoke to share her truth, to give James a sense of the life she had lived and the strength she had gained along the way. James listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. He asked few questions, but each one was thoughtful, carefully placed to show that he cared, that he was fully present. In return, James shared fragments of his own life. He spoke of the endless rides across the plains, of the people he had met, of the small acts of kindness that had kept him going in difficult times. He spoke of loneliness, of the solitude he had chosen, and of the lessons he had learned from living a life on the edge of the world. Clara listened with quiet attention, sensing that beneath his calm exterior, there was a depth of feeling he rarely allowed anyone to see. As the night grew darker, the atmosphere shifted from caution to quiet trust. They did not rush into anything beyond conversation, for they both understood the importance of respect and dignity. The marriage they were entering into was not about romance or desire. It was about protection, about trust, about human decency. And yet, in the quiet moments, in the shared laughter at small stories or the gentle understanding in their eyes, a subtle bond began to form, one that neither of them could fully explain, but one that both could feel. Clara found herself smiling, a small, genuine smile that she had not felt in years. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, she was not entirely alone. James's presence, calm and steady, brought a sense of safety she had forgotten existed. She felt a flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable, that perhaps life could still hold moments of connection, even after loss and sorrow. James, too, felt something unexpected. He had agreed to help Clara out of a sense of duty and compassion, but he found himself drawn to her resilience, her honesty, her quiet strength. He admired the way she carried herself despite the hardships she had endured, and he respected the clarity of her intentions. There was no pretense, no manipulation, only truth. And that truth, he realized, was rare and valuable, a treasure in a world often filled with false appearances. Hours passed quietly, filled with conversation, shared memories, and thoughtful silence. They ate a simple dinner together, the fire casting long shadows on the walls. Clara noticed small gestures from James, a careful attention to detail, a quiet patience, a readiness to listen, that made her feel seen and respected. She realized that this night, meant to be merely functional, was slowly transforming into something meaningful, something that neither of them had expected. As midnight approached, they sat together in the parlor, the warmth of the fire and the comfort of mutual understanding creating an atmosphere of peace. Clara reflected on the unusual path that had led her here. The widow who had lived alone for years, seeking safety and dignity, now sitting beside a man who had agreed to marry her for one night, not out of obligation, but out of compassion. She understood that trust was fragile, and that this moment was rare, a delicate balance of respect, courage, and human kindness. James, observing her quietly, realized that he had entered into more than just a temporary arrangement. He had become part of someone else's life, even if only for a short time. And in doing so, he had discovered something about himself, a capacity for empathy, a willingness to be present, a recognition that helping another person could bring unexpected fulfillment. Though neither spoke of what would come next, both understood that the night was more than a promise. It was a turning point. It was a moment of shared humanity, of quiet understanding, of connection that transcended ordinary words. And while the arrangement was meant to last only a few hours, the impact of their meeting would linger far longer, shaping the choices, feelings, and perspectives of both Clara and James. By the early hours of the morning, fatigue settled over them, but so did a sense of accomplishment and relief. Clara felt a quiet satisfaction that her home and her dignity had been protected, and James felt a quiet pride in having stood by someone in need, in fulfilling a promise with integrity and care. They had navigated the challenges of the night with patience, respect, and understanding, and in doing so, had laid the foundation for something far more meaningful than either had anticipated. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara and James prepared to rest, each in their own space, but united by the shared experience of the night. There was no need for further words. The understanding between them was complete. And though the night was meant to be only one night, both felt the subtle but undeniable shift in their lives, the beginning of a bond that neither time nor circumstance could easily erase. For Clara, the night had brought relief, dignity, and a renewed sense of hope. For James, it had brought understanding, connection, and a recognition of the value of compassion. And for both, it had brought a quiet lesson that sometimes the most profound moments in life come not from grand gestures or sweeping romance, but from small, deliberate acts of kindness, courage, and trust. The night had been quiet, calm, and respectful, yet the morning brought a strange sense of tension. Clara awoke first, her mind already racing with thoughts about what had passed and what was yet to come. The fire in the hearth had burned low, leaving the room bathed in soft gray light. She could hear James stirring in the other room, the subtle sounds of boots on wood and the quiet rustle of clothing. For a moment, Clara allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in years, a sense of relief, even warmth. The arrangement had been fulfilled as planned, yet she could not ignore the strange comfort she had felt in James's presence. It was not about romance, not yet, but it was about trust, respect, and companionship. She realized that in that one night she had allowed herself to be seen, fully and honestly, by another human being, and that had been a gift. James, meanwhile, prepared himself quietly. He moved with careful deliberation, aware that the night had created a bond of sorts, one that neither of them had anticipated. He reflected on the conversations they had shared, the small gestures, the moments of understanding. It was unusual for him to feel so connected to anyone, even temporarily, but he could not deny the depth of his own response. Clara was a woman of strength and dignity, and her courage had touched something within him that he had long kept hidden. When Clara stepped into the kitchen to prepare breakfast, she moved with a sense of purpose. She brewed coffee and laid out bread and fruit, setting the table with the small care that had always been part of her nature. James entered quietly behind her, and she offered him a nod of acknowledgement. Neither spoke immediately, both understanding that words were not always necessary to communicate respect and understanding. As they ate, their conversation drifted naturally from the previous night's events to lighter subjects: the weather, the crops in the fields, small memories from childhood. Yet beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, a realization that this arrangement, while temporary, had changed something fundamental. Clara found herself noticing small details about James: the way he listened, the slight crease in his brow when he thought deeply, the quiet patience that seemed to be a part of his very nature. She admired him, not for heroics or grand gestures, but for the quiet integrity he carried. James, in turn, found himself observing Clara with a new perspective. He had known her as a widow, a woman respected by the town, but now he saw the layers beneath the surface: the vulnerability, the strength, the determination, and the courage. He understood that her request had not been easy, that it had required a level of trust that was rare and precious. And he realized that in helping her, he had also discovered something about himself, a capacity for empathy, for understanding, and for connection that he had not fully acknowledged before. After breakfast, they moved outside, the morning air cool and crisp. The field stretched out before them, golden under the rising sun. Clara walked slowly, taking in the familiar sights of her farm, feeling the reassurance that came from knowing her home was safe. James followed, quiet and steady, as they made their way to the barn to check on the horses and ensure that the fences were intact. Their movements were coordinated, silent, and respectful, a reflection of the trust that had formed between them. As they worked, they spoke in low tones about practical matters: the crops, the fences, the animals. Yet even in these mundane tasks, there was a deeper sense of connection. Each small conversation, each shared effort, reinforced the understanding that had begun the night before. Clara realized that James's presence was more than a temporary solution. It was a reassurance, a reminder that even in difficult times, one could find help, companionship, and understanding. By mid-morning, Clara found herself reflecting on the events of the previous night in a way she had not anticipated. She had expected relief, yes, but not the sense of calm and confidence that now filled her. She realized that trust, once given and respected, could be transformative. James had not only honored her request but had done so with dignity, patience, and compassion. And in doing so, he had reminded her that life, even after loss, could still hold moments of grace and connection. James, too, reflected on his own feelings. He had agreed to the arrangement out of a sense of duty, but he found that the night had affected him more than he had expected. He admired Clara's courage, her clarity, and her integrity. He respected her for the choices she had made and the strength she had shown. And he realized that in standing by her, he had discovered a new dimension of his own character, a willingness to be present, to act with compassion, and to connect with another human being in a meaningful way. As the day progressed, the town began to stir. Neighbors came by, as they often did, bringing news, supplies, or simply stopping to check on Clara. She greeted them politely, her demeanor calm and composed, yet there was a quiet tension in the air. The town would not soon forget that she had requested help in such an unusual manner, and she knew that whispers and questions would follow. Yet she also felt a sense of pride and relief. She had acted with honesty and courage, and she had chosen her ally wisely. James stayed nearby, offering quiet assistance without intrusion. He repaired a fence post, tended to the animals, and ensured that Clara's property was in order. He did not speak unnecessarily, but his presence was reassuring. Clara noticed this, and she felt a quiet gratitude for his steady, reliable support. She realized that while the night had been the catalyst, it was the ongoing actions, the care, the respect, and the presence that truly mattered. In the afternoon, they took a moment to rest under the shade of an old oak tree at the edge of the field. Clara brought a small pitcher of lemonade, and they sat in companionable silence, watching the wind move through the tall grass. The world seemed to pause, offering a moment of peace in the midst of complexity and uncertainty. They did not need to speak. The silence was filled with mutual understanding and shared experience. Clara's thoughts drifted to the future. She knew that this arrangement was temporary, that the town's expectations and her own plans would soon require her to act independently once more. Yet she also recognized that the bond formed with James was not easily dismissed. There was a quiet connection, a shared understanding that had grown from a single act of trust. And she realized that even if the world did not recognize it, she had gained something invaluable. The knowledge that human kindness and integrity could still be found, even in unexpected places. James, observing Clara, reflected on the nature of trust and responsibility. He had agreed to help her out of compassion, yet he found that the act had enriched his own life in ways he had not anticipated. He understood that sometimes the most meaningful actions were those undertaken quietly, without expectation, simply because they were the right thing to do. And in helping Clara, he had discovered a sense of fulfillment that he had long thought unattainable in his solitary life. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Clara and James prepared for the final part of their agreement. Though the night had passed, and the immediate need had been addressed, the presence of one another had created a subtle but undeniable shift. Both understood that the events of this day had deepened their connection, had fostered trust, and had revealed qualities in each other that were rare and valuable. Before the evening fell, Clara took a moment to speak quietly with James. She thanked him for his kindness, his respect, and his presence. She acknowledged that the night had been unusual, perhaps even unconventional, but she emphasized that it had been meaningful beyond expectation. James nodded, his own eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. He too recognized that their shared experience had gone beyond a simple arrangement. It had touched something deeper within both of them, something that neither could easily forget. The day ended with a sense of calm and accomplishment. The house was secure, the animals tended to, and the fences repaired. Yet more importantly, both Clara and James felt a renewed sense of human connection. They had faced an unusual situation with courage, respect, and patience, and in doing so, had created a bond that transcended the ordinary. The events of the day had not only resolved immediate concerns, but had also laid the groundwork for something more profound, a trust and understanding that would influence their lives in ways yet to be discovered. As night fell once more, Clara and James sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on the day. There was no need for grand gestures or declarations. The silence itself was enough. They had shared meals, labor, and conversation. They had faced uncertainty together and emerged with a sense of mutual respect and understanding. And though the arrangement had been intended as temporary, both recognized that the experience had left a lasting impression, one that would shape the choices, feelings, and perspectives of both moving forward. In the quiet moments before sleep, Clara allowed herself a small, contented smile. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and judgment with courage, and she had chosen wisely. She had trusted James, and he had honored that trust with integrity and care. And though the night had been meant for a single purpose, it had become something far more meaningful, a testament to the power of human kindness, understanding, and connection. James, settling into his own space for the night, reflected on the lessons of the day. He had acted out of compassion, yet he had found himself enriched by the experience. He recognized that sometimes the most profound connections were forged in the quietest, simplest ways, through respect, patience, and presence. And he understood that the night and day he had shared with Clara were more than a duty. They were a reminder of what it meant to be human, to care, and to act with integrity. Morning came slowly over the quiet town, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. The air was cool and carried the scent of fresh earth from the surrounding fields. Clara woke before the sun had fully risen, her mind filled with both relief and worry. The night with James had passed peacefully, yet now the reality of the day ahead pressed upon her. She had received the protection and companionship she needed, but the town would soon stir, and with it, the consequences of her unusual request might arrive. She dressed quietly, choosing her clothes with care. Each movement felt deliberate, thoughtful, as if she were preparing not just for the day, but for the scrutiny that would follow. Her home, once a private sanctuary, was now in the quiet spotlight of gossip and curiosity, even though no one yet knew the full story. She could feel her heart racing as she imagined neighbors' questions, the whispers that might follow her down the streets, and the subtle judgments she might encounter. James was already awake, tending to his horse outside. He moved with his usual quiet confidence, checking the saddlebags and making sure everything was in order. When Clara stepped outside, he looked up and offered her a nod. It was a small gesture, yet it carried reassurance, a reminder that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would not face them alone. She returned the nod with a grateful smile, feeling the steady support he offered without words, without questions, and without judgment. Breakfast was simple, yet they shared it in companionable silence. Clara noticed how James's presence calmed her, how his quiet strength seemed to steady her own nerves. She realized that this was more than a temporary arrangement. The trust and respect between them had grown into something tangible, even if it was still undefined. And James, observing Clara's composure and quiet confidence, realized that he too felt the subtle changes that had occurred overnight. He admired her courage, her patience, and her ability to face life's challenges with dignity. Once the meal was finished, Clara suggested they take a walk to the edge of the property. The morning light highlighted the rolling fields, and the wind carried the sound of distant birds and rustling grass. She spoke little, choosing instead to observe the world around her. James walked beside her, hands clasped behind his back, his posture relaxed but alert. The walk was not about conversation. It was about presence, about allowing the day to unfold slowly and purposefully. As they approached the fence that bordered her property, Clara noticed a small group of townspeople gathered near the road. They were not yet aware of her arrangement with James, but she could feel the weight of curiosity in the air. The town had a way of observing unusual events and whispering about them behind closed doors. Clara took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had acted out of necessity, with honesty and courage. She did not need their approval, only their understanding, or at least their silence. James seemed to sense her apprehension. Without speaking, he moved slightly ahead, positioning himself so that Clara felt a quiet shield of protection. It was not forceful or commanding, but simply a presence that conveyed strength and assurance. Clara felt a wave of gratitude, realizing that this man, who had agreed to help her for a single night, was willing to stand beside her in the face of scrutiny. It was a gesture that spoke volumes about his character, his integrity, and the depth of his commitment to honor her trust. The townspeople noticed James's presence immediately. Their eyes followed him as he calmly approached, acknowledging their curiosity with a nod but saying nothing. Clara felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because James's calm authority seemed to temper their whispers, anxiety because she knew that questions and rumors would inevitably follow. She glanced at James, silently asking for reassurance. He responded with a small, confident smile, as if to say, "Do not worry. I am here." The morning passed with a slow tension, punctuated by the occasional visit from neighbors bringing greetings, supplies, or small favors. Clara handled each interaction with grace, maintaining her composure even as subtle questions lingered in the air. James remained by her side, assisting where needed, repairing a fence post here, guiding a stray horse there. His presence was both practical and symbolic, a reminder that she had not faced this alone, that she was respected, and that she had someone who would act with integrity on her behalf. As the sun climbed higher, Clara and James moved to the barn to check on the animals. The chores were simple, yet the shared work allowed them to communicate without words. A glance here, a nod there, a small gesture of understanding. They moved in rhythm together, completing the tasks efficiently and respectfully. Clara felt a subtle sense of ease, realizing that trust could extend into actions as much as words. James's quiet attention to detail, his steady hands, and his patient demeanor reassured her that she had chosen wisely. During a brief pause under the shade of an old oak tree, Clara allowed herself a moment to reflect. She realized that the arrangement she had requested, the one-night marriage, had achieved more than protection. It had created a bond of trust and understanding, one that neither she nor James could ignore. She felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. Relief because her immediate need had been met. Uncertainty because she recognized that feelings and connections had a way of growing, even when one tried to keep them temporary. James, observing Clara quietly, felt a similar internal conflict. He had agreed to help her out of duty and compassion, yet he could not deny the subtle shift in his own emotions. The night had revealed qualities in Clara that he admired deeply: strength, courage, and honesty. And her trust in him, granted so freely, had created a responsibility he did not take lightly. Though the agreement was meant to last only one night, he realized that both of their lives had been changed in ways they could not yet predict. By afternoon, whispers in the town had grown more noticeable. People were curious about Clara's sudden need for a husband, even temporarily, and questions began to circulate. Clara noticed the subtle glances as she walked through the streets, felt the half-spoken questions and the silent judgments. She did not flinch, for she knew that she had acted rightly, but she felt the weight of societal expectations pressing upon her nonetheless. James remained a calm presence, walking beside her when necessary, standing near her property, and quietly managing the interactions with the townspeople. He did not answer their questions unnecessarily, nor did he draw attention to himself. His quiet authority and composed demeanor seemed to temper the curiosity, making it clear that he was a man of integrity and reliability. Clara felt a surge of gratitude for his support, realizing that his presence had not only fulfilled a personal request, but had also shielded her from public scrutiny. As evening approached, Clara and James returned to the house. The day's events had tested her courage, patience, and composure, yet she had managed each challenge with dignity. James assisted with evening chores, ensuring the animals were settled and the property secure. Their movements were efficient, synchronized, and respectful, reflecting the bond that had grown over the previous night and day. After the work was done, they sat together quietly in the parlor. The room was bathed in the warm glow of the fire, and a sense of calm settled over them. Clara reflected on the day, realizing that while the arrangement had been temporary, its impact was lasting. She had gained not only protection and assistance, but also a sense of human connection that she had long thought lost. The experience had reminded her that trust, respect, and kindness could be found even in the most unexpected circumstances. James, too, reflected quietly. He had entered into this arrangement with a sense of duty, but he had found himself profoundly affected by the events of the night and day. He admired Clara's strength, respected her courage, and felt a subtle but undeniable bond forming between them. He recognized that the act of standing by someone, of offering support and protection without expectation, could create connections that were deeper and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. The evening passed with quiet conversation and moments of shared reflection. They spoke of the past, of challenges they had faced, and of the lessons they had learned. Their dialogue was thoughtful, respectful, and grounded in honesty. Neither spoke of romance, yet both felt the unspoken understanding that something significant had shifted between them, a bond of trust, respect, and human connection that neither could dismiss. As night fell once more, Clara felt a mixture of relief, pride, and uncertainty. The town had been managed, her home and dignity protected, yet the presence of James had created feelings she had not anticipated. She recognized that while the arrangement had been meant as temporary, its effects were lasting, influencing her emotions, her thoughts, and her perspective on life. James settled near the fire, reflecting on the day's events. He understood that the arrangement, though intended to last only one night, had created a shift in both their lives. He respected Clara deeply, admired her courage, and felt a sense of fulfillment in having acted with integrity and compassion. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that the bond formed between them was real, meaningful, and enduring. Before sleep, Clara allowed herself a quiet smile. She had faced scrutiny, uncertainty, and fear with courage, and she had emerged stronger and more confident. James had stood by her with patience, understanding, and respect, and in doing so had created a bond that neither could ignore. They had navigated a complex situation with dignity and care, and the experience had left a lasting impression on both of them. In the quiet moments before rest, both Clara and James understood that their shared experience had been more than a simple arrangement. It had been a test of trust, a demonstration of courage, and a lesson in human connection. And while the future remained uncertain, the events of the day had created a foundation for understanding, respect, and perhaps something deeper should both hearts allow it. The next morning arrived with the soft glow of dawn stretching over the fields. Clara woke to a quiet that felt heavier than usual. The night had passed, the day had brought its challenges, and now the moment of truth had come. The one-night arrangement was over, and both she and James had to face what that meant, not just to the town, but to themselves. Clara rose quietly, her thoughts tangled with both relief and an unexpected uncertainty. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple gown, one that spoke of dignity and composure. Today, she would walk through the town not as a frightened widow, not as someone seeking protection, but as a woman who had faced her fears and acted with courage. She knew the whispers would come. She knew the questions would follow her steps, but she also knew she had done what she had to do, honestly and respectfully. That truth was her shield. James was already awake, tending to his horse outside. The cool morning air moved through the open fields, and he paused to look toward Clara's house. He could see her silhouette in the doorway, poised and composed. He felt a quiet pride in the woman who had requested his help, not out of vanity or impulse, but out of necessity, and with courage he could only respect. For his part, he had done what he promised, yet he could not ignore the subtle shift within himself, the quiet bond that had grown stronger with every shared moment. Breakfast was simple, taken together with an ease that belied the tension of the coming day. They spoke little, focusing instead on shared comfort in the calm morning. Clara noticed the small, steady gestures of James, the way he poured the coffee, adjusted the chair, and watched her with quiet attentiveness. Each action reminded her that he was more than a temporary solution. He was a man of integrity, patience, and respect. And as much as she tried to remind herself that it was just one night, she could not deny the sense of connection that had grown. After the meal, they prepared to leave the house together. Clara walked with careful steps through the yard, while James adjusted the saddlebags on his horse. Neither spoke of the arrangement's end, for words seemed insufficient, yet both understood the weight of the moment. They had shared something rare, trust, vulnerability, and quiet companionship that went beyond expectation. It had not been about romance, not yet, but it had been deeply human, deeply real. As they reached the edge of the property, the town was beginning to stir. People moved about, tending their chores, opening shops, and speaking quietly among themselves. Clara could already feel their curious eyes, and she felt the familiar tension that came with being observed. She held her head high, determined to face whatever questions might come with composure. But then she noticed something unexpected, a quiet respect in the way the townspeople looked at her. There were whispers, yes, but there was also acknowledgement. They had seen her act with courage, and in that courage they found a reason to admire rather than judge. James remained by her side, steady and unwavering. His presence was both a comfort and a shield, a reminder that she was not alone. He did not speak unnecessarily, but each small gesture, offering his arm, guiding her carefully through the streets, acknowledging the townspeople with calm confidence, spoke volumes. Clara felt a surge of gratitude for the man who had come into her life so unexpectedly, who had honored his word, and who had shown her that trust could be met with respect. As they walked toward the town square, a few neighbors stepped forward, curiosity evident in their eyes. "Morning, Clara," one said a little hesitantly. "You're looking well today." Clara smiled politely, her composure steady. "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm and firm. She realized that she did not owe anyone explanation. Her actions had been honest, her motives clear, and the presence of James had ensured that her dignity remained intact. James, quiet and composed, noticed the subtle change in the town's atmosphere. Their whispers seemed less pointed, their glances less judgmental. His steady demeanor, combined with Clara's courage, had shifted the dynamic. The town had begun to recognize not only her strength, but also the integrity of the man who had stood by her. And in that recognition, Clara and James both felt a quiet validation, not for approval, but for having acted rightly in a difficult situation. By midday, they had completed the necessary errands. Clara's home was secure, her affairs in order, and the town had seen that she was capable and strong. Yet there was an unspoken question between her and James. What came next? The agreement had been fulfilled. The immediate danger was gone. But the bond formed between them could not be erased by simple words or by returning to separate lives. Clara turned to James, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For last night, for today, for standing by me." Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight of meaning. James nodded, his eyes reflecting quiet understanding. "It was the right thing to do," he replied. "You trusted me and I kept my word. That's all that matters." Yet both knew it was more than that. The night, the day, the shared experience, they had revealed something in each other that neither could ignore. Clara admired his integrity, his calm strength, his quiet patience. James respected her courage, her clarity, her ability to act decisively and honorably under pressure. There was a mutual acknowledgement, silent but powerful, that this connection could not simply be dismissed. As the afternoon sun began to lower, Clara invited James to sit with her under the old oak tree near the edge of her property. They spoke quietly about life, about the lessons learned through hardship, about the importance of trust and kindness. There was no need to rush, no need for grand declarations. Each word, each pause, each glance carried meaning. And in that space, both felt the subtle but undeniable shift that had begun the night before, the beginning of a bond that might, in time, grow into something more enduring. Clara spoke of her late husband, of the grief and loneliness that had followed, and of the fears that had prompted her unusual request. James listened attentively, offering gentle responses and never passing judgment. His presence was a balm, a reassurance that she was seen, heard, and respected. And as she spoke, Clara realized that the courage she had summoned to make the request had been met with integrity and compassion, a combination she had not dared hope for. James, in turn, shared memories of his own life, the long rides across the plains, the solitary work, the small kindnesses he had offered and received. Clara listened with quiet appreciation, realizing that his life, like hers, had been shaped by both hardship and resilience. And in their shared stories, a deeper understanding grew. They were two people who had faced loneliness, uncertainty, and hardship, and in that shared experience, they found common ground and quiet connection. As evening approached, Clara made a choice she had not anticipated. She looked at James, her expression steady and sincere. "James," she said softly, "I know this was meant to be just one night, but I would like you to stay. Not out of obligation, not because I asked, but because I think we've found something worth holding on to." James studied her carefully. He could see the honesty in her eyes, the strength in her words, and the vulnerability she had shared. He realized that he, too, had felt the shift, the quiet bond that had grown from trust, respect, and shared experience. And in that moment he made a choice, a decision not bound by obligation or agreement but by genuine desire and respect. "I will stay," he said simply, "not because it was promised, not because of duty, but because it is what I want. If you are willing to allow it, we can see where this leads." His words were calm, steady, and sincere, carrying a weight that matched Clara's own feelings. Relief, gratitude, and a quiet joy filled Clara's heart. She realized that the night she had feared might be only a temporary solution, had blossomed into something far more meaningful. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and societal expectation with courage, and in return, she had gained not only protection but the possibility of companionship, understanding, and a shared future. The town, slowly aware of the developing connection, reacted with curiosity but also with growing respect. People had seen Clara act with integrity and courage, and they had observed James honor his word with patience and dignity. The whispers of judgment gradually gave way to acknowledgement of their character, their strength, and their quiet perseverance. That evening, Clara and James sat together under the oak tree, watching the sun dip below the horizon. They spoke little, allowing the peace of the moment to settle around them. There was no need for dramatic gestures or declarations. The bond between them had been forged in the quiet acts of trust, respect, and courage. And as the stars began to appear in the sky, they knew that this was only the beginning of something enduring. A connection that had begun with necessity but had grown into genuine companionship. Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the loneliness, the courage to ask for help, and the trust to accept it. James reflected on his own path, the solitude, the quiet work, and the decision to act with compassion and integrity. Together, they understood that the events of the past days had changed them both, in ways that could not be undone. And as night settled over the town, Clara and James sat side by side, not as a widow and a helper, not as a temporary arrangement, but as two people who had found in each other respect, trust, and the quiet possibility of a shared future. The one night that had begun as a solution had become the start of something lasting, a testament to courage, kindness, and the unexpected ways life could bring hearts together.